Chapter 691. Who has them? As more guests arrived, the trucks were moved off into the parking area, and Dominic's group moved into the gardens to join the actual party and give their birthday wishes to the king. The whole point of coming in person was the visibility, letting the other nobles see you, meet you, and talk about the troubles and successes of their regions. Only then would you have a clear picture of what they all saw as the real issues. Naturally, everyone got reports. But they were often from the same source, and it could be biased, lazy, or even just inaccurate, thanks to limited information. But the nobles who ran the regions would have a different take on things than anyone else did. Am I underdressed for the occasion? Dominic whispered to Earl Tarley as they entered the garden. What do you mean? Your outfit is fine. In fact, wearing your official uniform is a bit of a flex here, where we're all titled, but not all appointed to royal duties. It's likely the horns, then. I was noticing a lot of those politely disgusted looks, Dominic whispered. Those might be for me. I don't have a great reputation. You see, the reason that Port Tarley is the way that it has started with my father. He funded most of the questionable entertainment facilities in the city to keep the sailors entertained and cut down issues with the pirates. They were known to attack cities along the coast at the time, but once he turned the city into somewhere that they didn't mind stopping, as well as an open port, they stopped causing troubles. However, that did not make us popular with the other nobles. That makes a lot of sense. With the two of us together, no wonder they're all giving us sour looks. Duke Devencrone laughed. Oh, that's not quite it. You see, as much as the Earl has a sketchy reputation as a purveyor of the flesh, he's also incredibly wealthy. A trait that I'm told you also share. Most of those sour looks are entirely envious of the success that the two of you have shared in entirely different manners. Dominic laughed, and a few of the expressions turned extra sour. So, the Duke was right. They were just upset that he had taken a chance and run into massive wealth in Stancha Province. The other Stancha Province nobles weren't doing nearly as well, but they were also still having issues with Wavemate's loyalists, the aftermath of the storm and the war. That was making their adaptation rougher than Dominic's, but they were all still doing at least moderately well. Better than some of the nobles who had taken over from relatives who had turned traitor. Their territories had been decimated, the population scattered, and punitive fines were levied for them to keep the title in the family, instead of having it entirely stripped by the king and assigned to a new noble. That had happened to some. It was also where most of the new and uncomfortable-looking faces in the room came from. They used to be the younger sons of another noble, but they had earned enough military merit, or their family had, that they were awarded titles to the lands of a deceased traitor. Dominic made his rounds, greeting every face that he recognized, and then the ones that nobody else seemed eager to talk to. If they were being ostracized, but not by the king, that meant that they were likely going to be eager to make a trade deal. A few more clients for Westover was never the wrong answer, and there was a chance that he could convince a few of these nobles to buy some of their more profitable items in bulk, like the Magitech fireplace inserts. What he found was a rather large group of eager customers. Duke Dominic, welcome. We didn't think that you would make it here this year. A young baron with bright green eyes greeted him. For a second, Dominic thanked the custom of wearing your noble house's crest on your clothing, as it was the only way that he could guess who was who. Even if he didn't know them all, he knew the ones above baron, as there were only a few dozen earls and dukes insignia. And once you knew the top ranks, it became easier to pick out the lower ones by their decorations, even if you didn't know the personal heraldry. We weren't certain that we were going to come, as my wife is expecting, but with the assistance of the mage sex in Westover, we used portals to visit. The new airships could have made it in a little over a day, but that's still a long trip in a small cabin with an uncomfortable wife. The Baron and his friends all laughed. That is understandable. I tend to make rather routine tours of the barony during the later months. We're on our third in 3 years now. And she still let you try for more? A woman of commendable character, I tell you. Dominic joked. He clapped the man on the shoulder in congratulations, and then the Baron's eyes went wide. Wait, you're married to the Paladin Princess, right? You and Thorvald of Northia. That is huge news. Does the Crown Prince know? The Baron asked, Knowing that this was the sort of gossip, he could not afford to not get details on for his wife. Even better, Crown Prince Claudius and His Majesty were in attendance when we all learned. So he was one of the first to know, and he knew before she was even showing. Confirmed by trollish doctors and everything. Trollish doctors? Dominic nodded. If you don't have one in your territory, I highly recommend it. They have a natural affinity for healing and nature magic, so they are every bit as versatile as a witch coven with a proper garden. But they're exceptionally useful as midwives, thanks to their ability to constantly heal. We haven't had too many births in Westover so far, but there have been a dozen or so who arrived heavily pregnant. We haven't lost a single one so far. The barons all shared concerned looks. Sure, trolls were a controversial topic, being non-humans that many residents of Signia consider monsters. But healers that could keep complicated pregnancies from leading to death? Far too many noblemen had lost wives to childbirth. If keeping a troll or two around the barony was enough to remove that risk, it was worth it. If they could also perform the service for the commoners, they would enter legendary days, no matter how they were judged by their peers. Well, everyone has their own faults and foibles. I can't say that keeping trolls in the barony house would be worse than most of the unmentioned things around here. Earl Tarley joked. The barons chuckled softly, knowing that he was talking about his own city's reputation. But he also had trolls in his city. They had arrived with trade ships, and some had remained behind to run apothecaries and healer shops. It had really helped with certain issues the city used to have. Chapter 692. The Man to Know. With talk of healers, more of the guests came over to join their group. Talk of technological advancements and new vehicles didn't interest the nobles who were traditionalists, or who were strapped for cash. But talk of healers? That was something that everyone could get behind. You have a source of trained healers? Count Darden asked as he joined them. Trolls. I've got an agreement with the trolls, and I've collected a number of them, along with a mage sect that specializes in alchemy and nature magic. We're already started on training a whole new generation of nature mages and healers. I noticed that there was a rather severe shortage, as not every village has even one capable healer. So, when the opportunity presented itself, I jumped on it. Count Darden looked shocked. You have so many healers and nature mages there that you can make a whole academy, using them for teachers? Dominic shrugged. We've got more than enough. We've also got a few freelance nature witches, a full coven making potions, a few techno-witches, techno-wizards, and traditional mages. If you haven't guessed, I've been actively recruiting sorcerers and other magic users for Westover's population. It's working well. With so many magic users on the guard force, they can even help the farms with blight and crop issues as they pass, just spreading a bit of magic to keep things like root rot at bay. It's been improving the crop yields to the point that we had to build new storage facilities to hold pulse crops until we could sell them to the Merchants Guild. And that's with the relief shipments that we have been sending out, and the pantries fully stocked. Now you're just bragging, Count Darden complained. His city had been hit during the war, and they were still rebuilding mostly manually as he didn't have a huge magical force available, and the infrastructure team that the king sent him was mostly doing government buildings and the city wall. There was so much to do in the region that the half-dozen men couldn't get to it all in one season. But if they were like Westover and had thousands of magic users to help them out, it would be an entirely different story. I don't suppose that you would have any of those healers still looking for work? Count Darden asked. Not quite yet. The training program is a few years long. But if you're in an emergency situation, we can send someone over for hire. I keep a bunch on staff, for just that reason. I have been thinking that we could likely work with one of the customers of our new high-speed airships and the Duskblade Mage sect to transport specialists to other nobles who needed them on a short-term basis. It's a different worker model, but not everyone needs specialists all the time, so being able to hire them without having to convince them to move to you would make them much more available. Dominic explained. So you will be running a worker exchange for techno-wizards, healers, and experts? Now that is an expensive proposition. One of the nobles noted. Indeed. But we've got plenty of work for them in Westover, especially with the magical device factories. Just the Magitech fireplace factory now employs over 50 people, all with at least basic techno-wizardry skills. Most are apprentices, but some are just skilled laymen. You made factories like production line factories for Magitech? Someone in the crowd asked. It's quite efficient. We can turn out nearly 100 Magitech fireplace inserts in a day. At that rate, we can make them affordable enough that they can be shipped all over the region and still be cheaper than a bespoke custom option. We've been shipping entire truckloads of them out with the Merchants Guild. Some of them are even off to the far southern regions, where they get much colder in the winter. The demand for them is insane, as they're not as heavily Magitech invested as we are. The Merchants Guild thinks there won't be any shortage of customers for a decade, and by then, many will be looking to upgrade or replace for more stylish versions. We've also had many using them in place of regular logs and wood stoves, instead of buying a full Magitech stove. That's genius. We've still got wood stoves in the house that the chef loves. If I could replace them with Magitech, we could save so much on ongoing wood purchases, a baron insisted. He's from down by Felscombe in the swamps. None of the trees there are suitable for firewood, and it takes forever to dry anything. Count Darden explained. Ah, that makes sense. A perfect usage case for a Magitech upgrade. If you don't catch up with me later, talk to the guild here in the capital. They'll have a shipment coming soon. You're certain? They sent a high-speed airship once a week, on a loop of the region. The capital is one of the first stops. They'll definitely have them. In fact, they might have a few in stock. Duke Sefton patted Dominic on the shoulder as he came over. Such talk makes us all jealous. Might I borrow you for a moment? Like Tarly, I am a man of ships, and I am interested in purchasing a few of your new style airships. Perhaps 10. The barons blanched at the comment. 10 airships could buy everything in their barony, including their own treasury, and perhaps their wife. That level of generational wealth was not something that they could compete with, and the Duke had a fleet of over 100 trade ships already, plus the naval vessels that were officially part of the Cygnian Navy. Of course. Excuse us, gentlemen. The king is still busy, so business comes first. I will be back before dinner. Are you staying a few days?
One of the barons asked.
Overnight, and then leaving by portal in the morning. Wonderful. Then I will see you at breakfast, if not later this evening. Enjoy your talk, Your Grace. Chapter 693. The King's Ideas. On their way to the sitting room, Dominic and the others came across the second prince, Axel, who was clearly waiting for them just inside the door. Gentlemen, welcome. I believe that I will join you for your meeting. I would assume that the Duke of Sefton and the Earl Tarly are both after the same thing? Airships made to the new design standards by Westover Duchy. Dominic nodded in agreement. There are others waiting to do business as well, but they decided to hold off on joining us at the moment, as they were looking to make a much more moderate purchase than a brand new airship. The prince gestured inside, not wanting to say too much until they were in a soundproofed room. Clearly, it was something more important than basic trade. If it were just that, it would have come up a month ago when he was in the duchy. Meaning, it had to be something new and important enough that he couldn't wait for Dominic to finish his trade deals. Possibly because he intended to monopolize a large portion of Westover's workforce for some reason. Once they were settled and the doors were closed, with only a few of the palace maids inside, preparing a light snack for them, the prince began his explanation. It is the opinion of my royal father and the crown prince that an expansion of international trade is in the nation's best interest. The over-reliance on the Merchants Guild, a foreign organization, has been a necessary compromise to keep goods flowing in and out of Cygnia. However, we can no longer maintain that status quo. It has been requested that our largest trading ports, as well as our merchant vessel manufacturing plants, would begin to study the feasibility of increasing the share of goods that are moved directly by the nobles of Cygnia across the borders. For this purpose, he is willing to fund a feasibility study and, should the results appear favorable, provide interim funding to expand manufacturing, as well as spread the purchase cost of such vessels across multiple years of taxation, the prince began. The two nobles shared an excited look. They were of the same opinion for their own personal benefit, naturally. But if the king was willing to work with the airship factories to help get more vessels moving, it would be a huge strain off their finances. Of course, they fully expected many of the airship manufacturers to say that it was simply impossible to expand their operations, and that they could not afford to have the payment spread over multiple years. That was not good business for them. They needed the exclusivity to keep their workers going at full capacity. If they expanded to push out more ships now, once the surge was over, they would have many expensive professionals sitting idle. And then they would be the ones facing financial ruin, not the king, and not the nobles who had the ships they needed. Even Dominic looked dubious. Well, I can certainly expand manufacturing to some extent, but more than 2 ships a month would be an issue. It takes years to train the professionals that we need, and the quality control for the new design is extremely stringent, with a high magical aptitude requirement. If they can at least use their trade-specific spells at level 10 to 15, they're essentially worthless to us in the factory. However, 2 ships a month is still twice what we have been producing, so there's that. But I suspect that what His Majesty wants to hear is that I will prioritize orders by the nobility instead of the Merchants' Guild.
That's exactly it.
They got the first few, and then Shersdonia and Axbridge both took one for their armed forces. Now, the king wishes to have these new design airships in the national fleet, moving cargo for those loyal to the crown. More money staying in the nation among the taxable nobility. The guilds are notorious for making wealth disappear before tax time, and the more that they make, the less revenue there is for everything else. The group here couldn't be better, actually. With Tarley on the north coast of the peninsula and Seavedon on the south, having them as way stations for trade to the regional powers on their sides of the country should stabilize our influence in the region. Naturally, the capital will want in on the action, but I haven't picked the right noble to approach about this matter yet. Dominic chuckled at his annoyance. You could do it yourself. You're a prince, you've got the funding and the information. You could set up a trading company and purchase a few of the new airships to keep goods flowing on behalf of the crown. Or would that cause too many issues with the political balance in the palace? Prince Alex shrugged. Most likely. I've already got high magical power on my side, so I get called on for all the specialist tasks that need it. If I was making more money than the other royals as well, it would definitely cause some friction. I had thought at first to have Russell do it, but as he's been stationed in Westover, it would look like you were the one benefiting from it the most. And that will definitely annoy the nobles out in the garden. The 4 men all sighed, knowing that no matter what they did at this point, they were going to be seen as unfairly favored by the king. Even the second prince knew that as the messenger, the nobles would assume that he was playing favorites and not simply picking the only logical cities to operate mass trade from. I will have a proper report on the viability of expanding production made up by the end of the week and sent back to the palace. The advisors and construction team might have some insights into the matter that I do not. In fact, I can almost guarantee it. Plus, if I start making promises without letting the dwarves at the airship forge yell at me first, they'll really kick up a fuss. Dominic decided. Chapter 694, and how to implement them. Earl Tarley simply shrugged. It will take at least a week or 2 to gather all the trade route information and export data that we will need for a proper royal report. Unlike the factory, which simply needs to provide feasibility numbers for workers and raw materials, the trade data will run to hundreds of pages. If we're going to try to overlap on what the guild is moving, we will need to work on the other end as well. They are the ones with the strongest customer base. So unless we're just going to sell to the guild offices in another nation and pocket the transport fees, not much would actually change. But as we don't personally know most of the nobles and we don't have the captains who do, the best we can do is run to the seaports that we already know. That won't expand trade by much, except for the speed. And that's not going to make up for the trade imbalance that the king is most worried about. It will still leave all the ground shipments going by guild caravans or independent merchants. I think that this report will be a much more complex matter than the king thinks that it is going to be. Duke Seavedon nodded. Tarley is right, this isn't as simple of a matter as buying a bunch of equipment, which we are already doing. If we're going to try to push the guild out, we will have to replace them in a dozen different ways, and on the international stage, they're still our most reliable middleman. If we start trouble with them here, we could actually make things worse for ourselves internationally. Prince Alex nodded. And I have told him as much. But he sees the potential for a much higher revenue to the nobles, and he won't rest until he has solid numbers in his hands. Even if the numbers aren't as large as he hoped, write up whatever tactic you think would be best. If it means replacing naval vessels with high-speed airships to move more cargo internationally to make money on volume, write it up. More profit is more profit, and they can figure out where the goods are going to come from later. I suspect that most of the answer is going to be Stancha province, as they've all been recently added to the trade network. The whole province has been productive lately, and they're all new to Signia's budget. If they can produce enough to keep your airships busy, it's all new markets. Plus, the nobles are here today if you want to make deals to buy from them directly. Surely, the guild won't get too mad about direct deals between a seaport and factory cities. Duke Seepton nodded. That should be true. Nobody will be mad if we do our own internal shipping, picking things up for the ports. A lot of the other nations prefer to send their own trade ships to us as well, instead of trusting Signian trade ships to bring them what they need. Like the king is thinking, everyone is in it for their own national interest. So, it's going to take some time to make the reports. But I'm more interested in if someone is going to be able to replicate those airships. It's not like they're hard to spot, so every yard in the country and 4 others knows the dimensions and basic structure. They're bound to make them eventually, right? Dominic shrugged. If they figure out the materials, sure. The real trick to them is the magical metals. They're stronger and lighter than traditional construction, so we keep all our cargo capacity, even though the actual covering is nothing out of the ordinary. Prince Alex looked relieved, but didn't say anything for a few seconds. All right, I will leave you all to it. Good luck with your trade agreements. You can send the reports directly to me, as I will be serving as advisor on this matter. Now, I have others to meet, so I bid you farewell. It's been a pleasure, Your Highness. Dominic agreed, as the prince left the room. Well, that was intense. But it doesn't actually change anything in our deals. We've got the money for our purchases, and if the king is willing to finance, more that can come later. So, can you put us on the list, preferably near the top? Earl Tarley asked. Of course. That won't be an issue, though if you're buying as many as Seepton wants, we might have to work a rotation between customers. That makes sense. We can't expect every other customer to wait a year or more for you to get through a massive order. Shipping them out in alternating order, so everyone on the list gets one every few months, will be a good start. I can do that. If we can expand the factory, we can likely make parallel lines. One dedicated to the nobles that the king wants to be pushed ahead of the line, and the other for all the other customers. The actual list is usually short because these are not cheap vessels. I will also have a whole list of specifications for you to choose between. There are options based on the crew you will have and the intended use. If you're going somewhere hostile, we can equip it with a few Magitech cannons for defensive fire. If you want maximum cargo capacity or improved speed at the cost of cargo capacity, those are both possible as well. The 2 men took out notebooks, and Dominic dug through a storage cube to bring out the basic specs of the airships. Look through those, and tell me what you want altered. There are some options listed, based on what has already been considered, but other changes can be made. Earl Tarley ran his finger over the list as he took notes. Well, at least you did understand that ships need cannons. Even if they're flying, they're not alone in the sky, and they do need to land somewhere. We're going to need at least 6 cannons, 3 per side. Even a light frigate carries 6 cannons, and they mostly rely on speed not to be overtaken. That's likely the strategy that these will use as well. But what's this about the crew's magical standards? You need at least 1 techno-wizard to use some of the functions, and to make repairs if anything breaks. It's a Magitech steam turbine engine. It will run on just the steam drive, but a bit of extra magic makes everything better. Plus, having a mage on board who can activate a barrier spell makes it much less likely that someone will tear the envelope open with a grappling hook or cannonball. It's a helium balloon, after all. If you lose all the gas, you're coming down.
Right.
That would be the reason they carry so much more without any magical assistance. The hot air envelopes with a heavy dose of magic are what we'd been trying in the past. Everything is a trade-off. However, if you have a barrier and a mage to operate it, they come equipped with a Magitech orb to refill the helium should you spring a leak. In short, the mage is an important part of the crew.
Got it.
New crew composition. Perhaps hire some mages as captains. Chapter 695. Letting the right people know. Duke Seepton shook his head as he looked at the requirements that they had. Perhaps as a first officer, A mage would be fine, but not as captain. There are too many of these systems that need concentration to operate that will take him away from the controls. Even if we moved them all to the steerage pedestal, it would still be too much for one man to operate them all at once, which is likely why they were separated in the first place. Well, the staffing issues are a problem, and it looks like we won't get around hiring both a captain and a techno-wizard for the airships. An expense to operating them, but a necessary one that most of the airship fleets already pay. At least we can make up for it with increased speed of travel. Now, you have the list of requests that we have, and I will give you a communications token so your people can contact me with changes or updates to the request. Things don't always work out as requested, but as it's all on the list, I am hoping that there aren't too many issues with combining them all. Of course, I should go join the rest of the Stantia province nobles in the garden. They're almost all newly promoted and lower ranking. I can't have people bullying my province so soon after we got it from Dagos. Dominic joked. The other two chuckled, and Earl Tarley gestured to the door. You're right. You should go rescue your people. There are a lot of other new titles in the crowd today, but none of them are quite as rural as your group is considered. If someone starts trouble with them, it will just cause more issues for all of us who are hoping for more trade. Duke Sievta nodded. Keeping good terms with the ones making the trade goods is essential to a trade port, especially when the cities in Stantia province seem to be the only ones that are going to have a proper crop this season. Everyone else got hammered by weather or had their fields and equipment trampled during the monster invasion and war. So, it's going to be a famine year, with mostly just Stantia province producing anything. That sounds problematic. The other duke shrugged. Well, it's not as dire as a full crop failure, but the yields will be way down, and then there are the levies that the nobles will make to repay the war efforts and the families of the fallen. It's a tough time for everyone after a war. But enough of the depressing topics. Back to the important things. Go save your people, and we will socialize and collect the news from the others. They know their territories the best, and what they're going to ask the king's advisors while they're here. That reminded Dominic. They might have moved out and away from the palace drama, but now that he was back for the day, he was likely to run into Advisor Morgana and perhaps a few other familiar faces. What he didn't expect was to run into the chef from the servants' kitchen moments after leaving the meeting room. Ah, young dragonkin. You've made quite a name for yourself. She greeted him, and Dominic smiled. This was the chef who had given him extra rations when he went with the princess on the mission to find the source of the monster hordes, and as he recalled, he had promised her a good knife. Or was it a proper repair on the one that she had? It's good to see you again, chef. Are you working the party this evening? The old woman nodded. With Beth gone, I got a promotion. Her apprentice took over her duties with the royals, but I got the parties and events that she used to cover. Less work and more pay. Wonderful news. I do hope that it came with all the best benefits. Dominic joked. Well, that it did. But the palace chefs have always been treated very well.
You know the saying.
Don't anger the one who makes your food. But the king and his family have always been quite fond of predictability, and changing chefs changes the taste of certain dishes.
That is a great saying.
And I totally understand about predictability. If we didn't have Chef Beth at the house, it simply wouldn't be the same. I know that she's started to train another successor, now that she's moved to the duchy estate, but even after a few years, she will still need time to pass down so much knowledge and all the special techniques. Every chef lost is a culinary tragedy. Spoken like a true foodie, Your Grace. If it's not too bold, how is the princess adapting? Pregnancy can affect the taste buds in the most peculiar ways. I've not noticed anything strange yet, but that doesn't mean she hasn't arranged something with the kitchen. Keeping up with everything that happens inside the house is not my strong point, as my lovely wife has taken charge of all the staffing and training-related duties. It was probably better not to mention the veiled maids here in the palace, where news that they were more than they seemed would spread fast and uncontrolled. The chef smiled. As expected, she was always a strong personality. Thank you for not stifling it. Dominic laughed and nodded. Even if he had wanted to, she would likely just beat him up, not the other way around. There was no stifling the paladin princess. It would just make both of their lives miserable. I will let you get back to your duties. There is a round of lemon squares going out to the crowd that I believe you will enjoy, the chef declared, then scuttled away with remarkable speed for a woman her age. It was a bit startling, but then Dominic saw that there were other nobles coming down the hall, and she most likely hadn't wanted to be seen fraternizing and away from her duties by anyone who lived in the castle and might accuse her of slacking. Chapter 696. Up for grabs. Dominic made his way back to the party and rejoined the group from the 3 cities of Stantia province, who were currently deep in conversation with a group of southern barons from near the Midfield border. Both shared the pains of being assigned to a border region, though the Midfield border had been friendly for generations. Even at a friendly border, they were still the forefront of all sorts of issues such as smuggling, bandit migrations to avoid prosecution, and even desertion during the war. That last one had been the hardest for them, as the deserters were often the sons of noblemen that the barons knew well. The common folk were much less likely to flee the country if they deserted. They would feign injury and move to another territory. It wasn't like everyone knew some random farmer's son from hundreds of kilometers away, so they could be essentially anonymous as long as they stayed away during days their own lord was visiting. Then, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd that shouldn't have been there. So, Dominic turned away from the group and went to greet the out-of-place guest. If I recall correctly, you should be the Duke of Staptenden and Dagos, correct? Dominic asked, already knowing the answer. Indeed, though that may be changing in the near future, Duke Dominic. You see, in the aftermath of the Civil War and the tragedy of the disaster that collapsed the capital city and depopulated the north, my Eastern allied nobles feel that remaining part of a united Dagos is no longer in everyone's best interests. It would be better to separate the provinces into 5 smaller territories, operating as a collective and not a monarchy. Well, that is interesting. Though I noticed that you said 5 sections. There are 8 provinces to Dagos. Bridhurst and Albrol's provinces are the core of Dagos. Wisham province is stronger than most and has good leadership. But the northeastern 3 are essentially depopulated north of Bamberbury, and the Lord Bamberbury is in charge of the rebuilding of the region. I have taken charge in Horstabia, but the province has essentially been abandoned by the crown for 2 generations. Dominic nodded. So, you have come to seek the support of the Signian king for the change? Somehow, I feel like this is going to be more headache. But, what of Kynwyn province? It borders both your province and Albrol's province. The Duke shrugged. There are no more people in Kynwyn province. Those who didn't die left. Kynwyn City is a ghost city now that the waters have receded, and not even looters dare enter with the amount of damaged magic in the buildings. Just standing too close to them can be fatal. The entire place is a tomb, a monument to the fallen of the disaster, and as far as I know, all efforts to rebuild it have been abandoned. Our reports show fewer than 30,000 survivors from the province, mostly already moved to Stantia province, though some have been spotted in Witheten and Albrol's. So few that it doesn't really make a difference, except to Albrol's, which lost a huge amount of its population to zombies, despite fending off the worst of the floodwaters. I would imagine that if you asked the king, he would likely give it to you as a gift for help rebuilding the capital. Dominic smiled, and the Duke shrugged. I'm not entirely joking about that. Kynwyn City terrifies me. I was there already, intending to send crews to help rebuild it. But we couldn't even enter the city without losing members to damaged spell work from ruined buildings. Now, that is interesting. I had thought that the city would largely survive the floods, thanks to the barriers on the buildings. I know that most of the farmhouses in Westover would survive a flood, even if you had to shovel tons of mud out of them afterward. The fact that the buildings collapsed when the whole capital was made of solid marble is a bit suspicious. Duke Staptenden nodded. That's our opinion as well. That place is cursed and wants us gone. I swear, some of those buildings were intact when we first went back, but they're collapsed now. Honestly, I wouldn't put it past them. The mages who designed that city were an interesting bunch. But that gives me a lot to think about. I might actually ask King Gustav about the province. I'm sure he won't give it up cheap, but I can make it worth his loss. The Duke laughed. I actually meant to ask your king to negotiate it. But if you think that you can actually purchase an entire province, it might be the most amusing political disaster in recorded history. Well, there is that. However, King Axbridge isn't going to object, the Signian king won't object, and if I pay the king of Dagos, he won't either. How do you know that Axbridge won't try to claim it for themselves? Because the river runs right through the middle of the ruins. If you think the place is cursed now, what do you think will happen if another group of outsiders tries to claim and rebuild it? It's likely better to either let the city remain as ruins, or bring back the original mages who built it. And neither of the kings can do that. He likely couldn't either, but that wasn't information that the Duke needed. Especially when there was a chance for Dominic to reclaim the rest of Wavemates. The Kaiwan province was much smaller than Stantia province, but it had once had a much higher population than even the 3 major cities of Stantia combined. Not just because Kaiwan had close to 2 million people at its peak, but because it had fertile cropland that could support a city that size as well. Now, that cropland was viable, but the farmers had fled or drowned. Too many had tried to remain to the very last minute, assuming that because their farms had never flooded before, they would not flood this time. They had been wrong. Chapter 697. Spread the news. Duke Staptenden looked upward at the royal quarters, then turned back to Dominic. You know, the king is here right now, meeting with the king of Signia to help solidify his position. They worked together during the siege of Albrols by the undead, so it appears that they are strong allies. But I don't know if he is going to try to get foreign assistance to maintain unity. You see, he would only share a small border with Signia if we separated, and I would have a large amount of mostly useless land with an equally large border. If he pressures the king to back him, we might be right back to the civil war, but without the sly tricks and theatrics. Dominic nodded. I can see how that would go. But the whole nation is in ruins. So, at this point there is an argument to be made in any direction about what is the best way for it to move forward. However, I think that your position might actually hold weight here. You see, prior to the disaster, Dagos had a larger population and a strong military, and that led to multiple invasions. It would generally be in the interests of the nearby powers to break the nation up to stop their aggressive tendencies. That's my hope as well. Now, I know that you're in a unique position here, but if you could voice your opinion among the other higher nobles, I would appreciate your support. Duke Staptenden suggested. I think that might be possible. Now, I really should go rescue my Stantia province nobles from the wolves. They're all newly promoted, and you know how the old blood can be about testing those who have just gained their titles. The two dukes separated, and Dominic noticed that his presence had caused many of the others to want to know what the Dagos noble had to say. If he could have a productive conversation with Dominic Wavemates, of all people, it must be something important that was not obviously detrimental to Signia. If it was, things would have gone much differently. Earl Limpsbury, how are things going? Dominic asked as he joined the others. Other than the fact that I have been called Baron at least 20 times in the last 2 hours? Not terribly. We've got a long road ahead of us, with most of the nobles. However, we did find a few friendly faces in the group. Kilksey and Skypington are both amenable to joining an airship route between Westover and the capital for weekly deliveries. Then there are the eastern seaports. Rumor is that they want to buy a bunch of their own airships to cut out the middleman and move goods straight from Stantia province to the ports. Strangely, the nobles who are affiliated with the Merchants Guild don't seem too mad about that. It's cutting them out, but they're not fussed. Dominic laughed. That's because it only cuts them out of the shipping across Signia. They're still the largest buyer and broker at the other end. If the two ports can take the stress off their caravans, it's good for them. Moving things for export is a strain on the merchants. If the ports are doing it themselves, the merchants can focus on the internal shipments, mostly the localized ground movement of goods. That's where the best money is, and no airship can replace a full caravan from a major city to the barony markets. That's not the big news of the day. Have you heard about the Dagos issues? The group of Stantia province nobles all nodded. If you're going to try to fight for Kaiwan province, or even the majority of it, we will back you. As you likely already know, the population of the region is so incredibly low now that even reassigning a few barons to oversee the surviving farms will likely do it. Earl Coster noted. Dominic smiled. My first thought is to obtain the territory, but then I was thinking of holding titles for the next generation. Instead of appointing lords to empty lands and trying to convince enough of the farms and villagers to move back, it would be better to just oversee the area loosely as a protectorate and having the army keep it from turning into a bandit playground. The Earl considered the option, then shook his head. You will need to move nobles there as overseers, even if their titles are temporary. A few military outposts, some roaming patrols both by the highway and the river, and you could take care of it with 2 battalions of soldiers. Then the farm towns might feel safe to move back. There weren't any major cities except Kynwyn, but the whole region used to be perfectly suited to farming, and nearly all of the northern region was worked. At least a few thousand farmers will want to move back, no matter who is in charge. Dominic nodded. And we can't forget the wavemates factor. Once they find out that I'm in charge, there will be some who want to come back to the region simply to be back in wavemates territory. The old capital apparently is in worse shape than expected and is unlikely to be able to be rebuilt. I will go see that for myself, though. Once I find a chance to speak with the King of Dagos, I will know more, and I will pass it on to you. What do you need from us? Earl Coster asked. Nothing yet. However, I suspect that the deal to obtain Kynwyn County will require ongoing payments in the form of food and materials to Dagos. Rebuilding support. That sort of thing. So, I might ask you all to set up mage training academies in your cities in the near future. Good ones, on par with the royal academies in Eastern Signia. We will need them to support the progression of the province. Westover is doing exceptionally well with its factories, but there are a lot of customers in the world. The Earl smiled. If you think that you can convince the mages to come out of hiding and set up factories, we would all be grateful. There are plenty of rumors of mages and witches hidden in the cities, but even after the change in leadership, most of them haven't opened businesses or made their powers public. But we don't really know how to convince them that it's safe to do so. Well, I could send you some trolls. Once they see that the trolls support you, they do tend to be a bit more open. Chapter 698. Some people like trolls. The Earl sighed. Why did it have to be trolls? You know that they don't like the rest of us as much as they like you, right? And that's exactly the problem. If the trolls don't trust you, the rest of the sorcerers won't either. It's instinctive at some level for those with monster blood in them, an innate aversion to those who aren't like them and whose loyalties are unknown. Dominic replied. The Earl noticed that his counterpart from Westfield River, a county outside Westfield City, was looking a bit embarrassed, like he wanted to avoid the conversation, but was somehow involved. Tell me that you didn't make an enemy of the trolls. Earl Coster demanded. No, enemies isn't the word that I would have used. You see, I may have taken a forest troll as a mistress after my wife was confirmed as infertile. She was heavily injured during her first and only pregnancy and can't have any more children. Why didn't you just take another wife? It's not unheard of. Or pick one of the maids. The Earl asked. Well, that's what I did, now isn't it? She told me that if I wanted an heir so badly, I could damn well shag a troll. And the healer's assistant thought that was mighty funny, and she told the staff, and one thing led to another, and now I've got a very pregnant forest troll waiting for me at home with an upset and confused wife. Dominic laughed. And now you have to inform the king. It's protocol that the royal records are updated with the birth of every potential heir. With no son from your wife, your heir is likely going to be half-troll. Earl Coster frowned. I'm not saying that I don't understand the need for an heir, or a man's natural needs. But I am judging you. The man shrugged, while the Earl from Limpsbury laughed. This gets funnier if you've met his wife. She's a full head taller than he is, muscular enough to give your gate guards a run for their money. And forest trolls are rarely more than 150 centimeters tall, especially the females. Though, if you can get past the fact their skin looks like tree bark, they're shapely enough, I suppose. The sound of someone choking caught Dominic's attention, and he turned to see one of the king's advisors standing next to them, holding half a glass of red wine and wearing the rest. What sort of talk is this for a public gathering? He demanded. Talk of the heir of Westfield River County. It has been confirmed by the healers that a strong and healthy heir is on the way, but a few of the others had opinions about his choice of surrogate. Right then. Congratulations are in order, I suppose. I will have an appointment made with the record keeper. Duke Wavemates, Earls, the king has requested your presence as a group. Dominic nodded. Should I send a runner to inform my Duchess? I believe that she will want to meet with her father. The advisor shook his head. She has seen him already, and is in a meeting with Advisor Morgana. This is a matter of royal affairs, not just the usual birthday greetings. The royal summons naturally caused gossip to spread. Anyone who was summoned before the king had made the official appearance at his own birthday had to be incredibly important to the monarchy, either in a good way or a troublesome way. But he was also meeting with the King of Dagos earlier, and with what everyone had heard from Duke Staptenden, this meeting might be an absolute nightmare. All of the men he summoned were from Stancha province, presumably the front line should another war with Dagos break out. But if they were going to work out with Dagos, they were also the majority of the border nobles, as well as the governor of the province. The small group followed the advisor up to the royal quarters, where they found not just the king, but also King Gustav of Dagos and both of the paladin twins, plus a dozen advisors and dukes in the room. Supposedly, they were all in separate meetings, but the rooms were connected by hidden passages, and they had all gathered in the same spot. Dominic stopped just inside the door and bowed politely to the king, who gestured for the group to rise. Welcome, Duke Westover, Earls. Please take a seat, and we will bring you up to speed. The king began. We have been in meetings with Dagos for some time now, and it has been deemed not feasible for the nation to continue to exist at the borders it had previously held. As such, we are working with our royal counterparts in Axbridge as well as in West Kyria to stabilize the situation. Now, on to the important parts. Kynwyn City has been examined and deemed a forbidden zone. Not only will it be impossible to rebuild the city within our lifetime, it is no longer even safe to pass boats along the river. Unstable magical energies abound, and Axbridge has lost 2 naval shipments intended for relief of Albrolls already. The exact details are unknown, but the boats were found 30 kilometers downriver with only the skeletons of the crew on board, as if they had been abandoned for centuries. This has led King Witheten to petition to have the region declared a forbidden zone, not to be entered or occupied by anyone. I happen to agree with him. However, that leads us to the next issue. Without Kynwyn City, and without the ability to ship goods by river, there is no reason for anyone to return to Kynwyn province. King Gustav believes it is a lingering aspect of the bloodline curse that caused the disaster, and he would like to expunge it from his territory for a somewhat reasonable fee. Dominic resisted the urge to smile. This was exactly what he had been hoping for. Wavemates had chased the invaders out on its own, and now he just had to give one final push, and he would have his entire homeland back. Chapter 699, The Price. The king paused for a moment to ensure that everyone was up to speed with his plan. All right, the advisors will hand you the payment requests that Dagos has made for the lands of the province. Dominic opened the packet that he was handed and found that the price was actually much lower than he had feared. Weapons, vehicles, tools, food shipped monthly for the next 10 years, trade concessions, and a marriage alliance between the royal families. All of them looked pretty standard, as far as Dominic could tell. Though, he did see that it mentioned the royal families, not the legitimate children of the kings, which would have guaranteed that it was a pairing that would put them somewhere in the line of succession for one of the thrones. All right, this looks reasonable. Shipping food for 500,000 every month for 10 years will be an issue, but I assume that load will be spread over more than just the regional baronies. Dominic asked. The king nodded. It will. We have arranged the details, and you will get an official notification of obligation soon. The cash payments on top of that amount have already been arranged from the crown treasury. What is included is the amount that will need to be sourced from the nobles. However, we will reduce the amount paid from the taxes owed, so that no territory is unduly burdened due to high industrial or agricultural capacity. The other nobles will be informed at the dinner this evening, but as this is directly relevant to your territories, it was deemed advisable to inform you ahead of time. In short, he wanted to be sure that they weren't going to rebel against the idea, or get the impression that they were going to be facing the entire bill, as Stancha province was the most productive in the nation, while many others were struggling. Dominic did quick mental math. The total shipment was 5,000 tons a month. That was 100 airship loads with their new cargo airships, or 10 ground-based convoys. That was certainly logistically possible. At least it would be if they had 3 or 4 airships to do the job with, or were willing to send out caravans with portals to cut down on travel time. That would change the math on their production schedule, as Dominic assumed that the king would be pushing to get an order of airships for the kingdom moved to the front of the line. Either that or shipping was going to be paid by Dagos. He hadn't read that part of the details, only the summary. Getting that much food moved, plus the weapons and tools to rebuild their defensive force, as they had lost virtually all their material stockpiles and equipment in the disaster, was going to be a nightmare. Though, if he could get a nice forge going to make them new weapons, they were expensive, much more expensive than food, anyhow. Sending entire airships full of tools and weapons to Dagos would leave Stantia province as a tax-free territory for a decade. Dominic would just have to eat the cost of the manufacturing and labor. If he explained it to all the barons, he was certain that they would be on board with the plan and would likely even agree to set aside crops, even if they had to pay their farmers for them until the tax exemption ended in a year and a half. The real challenge was going to be seeing how many farmers they could get back into Kainwen province when there were no more cities in the region, and how much the king was going to let him get away with. There was nothing in this report about how the province was going to be regulated or distributed. So, he would have to find out from the king or one of the advisors later. If it was assigned to someone else, he would have to brief them on the culture of the area as well, so that they didn't end up ruling over empty land. That would be a tragedy, especially with the vast potential of the region. Though it really would be an ironic turnaround. Before Dagos invaded, Kainwen was the capital, and the far side of Stantia province was essentially uninhabited. Now, Westover was becoming the regional capital, and the Kainwen region was empty. The king tapped his desk to gather everyone's attention. And now, for the part that I know you've all been waiting to hear about. The title of governor of Stantia province will be changed to governor of the Western Territories, encompassing Stantia and Kainwen provinces. Once a formal assessment of safety and population have been made, counts and barons will be promoted from within the nobility to ensure stability in the region. The interim military force protecting the region will be announced soon. Expect that the title of governor will likely remain within the royal family through my children and grandchildren. As a supervisory position, I expect that it will largely be bureaucratic within the next decade, though for now it remains an active management position, and Governor Dominic will be responsible for the reporting and assessments for the crown. Dominic bowed politely, doing his best not to let his true opinion of being assigned more paperwork show. It was an incredible honor, and a level of power that only a few others within the kingdom could match. But it was a lot of paperwork. Nobody seemed to object to the announcement, or perhaps they had expected it. But the people in this room also weren't the ones who were likely to see the new appointments. It was the ones outside in the party that were most likely to be in line for a promotion to count or baron who might be awarded lands within the province. Which reminded Dominic he was also supposed to have a report on the unpopulated regions of Stantia province ready soon, so that more lands and titles could be assigned. How had he ended up with this much bureaucracy in his life? Chapter 700. Must be paid. With the meeting between the most affected nobles concluded, the king ushered them all out of the office and down to the party, walking at the front with King Gustav of Dagos at his side. It was a silent statement of solidarity with the king, a statement that he would go with whatever the king of Dagos wanted, no matter what the other visiting nobles had been promoting. So, every noble in the event was waiting with tense anticipation as the news was quietly spread by the advisors. A birthday party was not the spot for a formal announcement, so the advisors would spread the official news through the crowd, informing everyone of the king's will in minimal detail, and then they would get more details later if they needed them, or through the official announcement of royal decree that would come later. If they were going to claim more territory, that would definitely need a decree. Dominic took Alexis' hand and guided her out into the crowd, followed by Thorvald and Josephine. The ladies would have a lot of nobles coming to talk to them, as one had big news, and the other hadn't been back since she was married. In those circumstances, it was easier to have the two husbands at their side. Not because they couldn't deal with the nobles, but to avoid having the ladies pull weapons on someone when they got annoyed. It was strictly for everyone else's safety. Alexis' temperament hadn't seemed to have changed, But Dominic had heard many horror stories about the easily enraged nature of pregnant women in every nation he visited as a youth. Your Grace, welcome back to the capital. I have been hoping to make your acquaintance today. An older noble greeted Dominic in an overly polite, almost fawning tone. Likewise. Dominic agreed, after realizing that the man hadn't introduced himself.
Right.
I am the Earl of Arberg, a port 200 kilometers east of the capital. I have heard wonderful things about your work in Westover, and the Guild has been running regular routes through my airship docks on their way to West Caria. Ah, it's a pleasure, Earl Arberg. My apologies for not recognizing you immediately. The images I had for reference simply don't do justice. In reality, they were likely made 30 years ago and never updated. The man weighed twice what he did in the stock image and no longer had the deep black locks that were in the image. Instead, his head was shaved and his remaining beard was white. Princess Alexis, it's a pleasure to see you again. Josephine nodded. George, it's always an interesting day when I see you. The Earl seemed to take that as a compliment, but it was very clearly not. Not even a little bit. But that is Alexis. Or did you think that I looked pregnant? She continued, and the man paled. My apologies, Your Highness. Neither of you appears to have gained any weight at all, and you know how bad I am at telling you apart. Please forgive me. The Earl began backing away, his request for Dominic long forgotten. All that he could do now was try to escape from the mistake that he had made before he said something else that would make it worse. Dominic chuckled as the man vanished back into the crowd, and the sisters celebrated running off another creepy nobleman. He likely wouldn't try anything again, now that they were married. But they hadn't forgiven him yet, and had no intentions of doing so. Seeing that the twins were up to their usual hobby of chasing away nobles that they didn't like, the others who were about to come up to say hello took a second to consider whether they were on the sisters' blacklist. Fortunately, most of them barely knew the pair, and weren't among the nobles who had tried to obtain a royal marriage. That was the presumed reason that they didn't like the Earl. It was well known that he had requested an arranged marriage with one of the two, but was turned down by the king. What most didn't know was that the sisters didn't even care about that. Dozens had made the same request, after all. They just didn't like him. The new Marquis Burton was the first to come over and greet them after the Earl, arriving with a large smile on his face and receiving an equally warm welcome. Marquis, how is your father? I heard that he retired here, to the capital. Dominic greeted him. He's well, recovering, but he's stepped away from royal events. I delivered his gift to the king's receptionist earlier today, as father won't be coming to the party. Well, parties are mostly for the younger folk anyhow. Once you get to a certain age, standing around all day, drinking and socializing is just hard on the knees and back, or so I'm told. Dominic joked. Oh, according to whom? My new advisor, Jack Merlot. The Marquis laughed. He took a role as an advisor to the duchy? Now that I did not expect. I had thought that he would just request financial compensation from the king and retire somewhere warm and pleasant, perhaps Port Tarley. Dominic shook his head. The old man is attempting to stay on the straight and narrow these days. He's even started sipping expensive wine, instead of drinking mead by the tankard. Marquis Burton laughed, not believing a word of that. He had known Jack Merlot for many years. The man was a friend of his father and grandfather. Hearing that he had stepped away from the army was startling enough, but hearing that he was working as an advisor and moderating his drinking was downright unbelievable. How is the construction work at Burton going? Alexis asked, steering the conversation away from old men who weren't in attendance.
Quite well.
They got it all nearly finished, including the upgrades that we requested, to make the buildings a bit more fireproof. You'll be happy to know that the whole city has slate tile roofs now, or at least not wooden ones. And there are no more thatched roofs at all inside the city walls. That's upset quite a few workers, but they're adapting well. It's all part of the process, I suppose. The thatchers have started doing all sorts of roofing these days, moving away from the specialty to simply specializing in the tops of the building. All that's left is to place an order for some of those lovely transports you arrived in. Compared to the cars we've been using around town, they're positively bespoke.